Hello and welcome to our IVF webinar. Again, it is 8 p.m. UK time, therefore it is time to start our live event. And today, definitely an interesting topic we have another top experts. So first of all, our topic today is pregnancy after 40. Remember, you will be able to ask your questions. So all you need to do is just simply type those questions in the chat section. And of course, we do have a special guest, and it is Vladimiro Silva. Hi, Vladimiro. How are you feeling?
Hi, Caroline. I'm good. Thank you.
I'm
Very
glad
happy to
to
be here once again.
Exactly. This is not your first time with us, and I'm very, very happy to have you back with us. And I am really looking forward to your presentation. As always, I'm sure it will be interesting for everyone. And I just want to mention that Vladimiro is an embryologist, CEO, and founder and IVF Lab Director at Ferticentro and Procrear clinics in Portugal. So today we are connecting with Portugal. And before we start, let me just remind everyone that all the Stronger Together in Together events are brought to you thanks to our ambassadors and partners. There are a bunch of people that was and still is helping us with their support. So you can see all of them right here. As always, thank you for your assistance, for your presentations, um, for taking part in our Stronger Together initiative as well. And as I've mentioned, we will start today with the presentation from Vladimiro, and after that it will be time for your questions. So as always, don't forget to type those in so that Vladimiro can help you out, as always, of course. And it is being recorded, so of course if you'll have any issues, I hope not, but if you do not worry, you will have a chance to watch this again. I believe everything is working. You can hear us loud and clear, but just in case, let us know. And that is it from me. Vladimir, are you ready to start?
Yes, I am. Well,
Excellent.
thank you,
Thanks so much.
Caroline. Thank you once again. It's always a pleasure to be here and participate in this wonderful initiative from myivfanswers.com. Today, I'm going to talk about pregnancy after the age of 40, which is something that we see a lot. I come from two private clinics in Portugal, one in Coimbra, which is called Ferticentro, and another one in Porto, which is called Procrear. Obviously, in the private sector, that happens more often. Patients get to us and trying for a pregnancy once when they are already 40 or even older, sometimes even older than 50, but those cases we cannot accept because our law only allows us to treat patients until the age of 50. But obviously, the main question that everybody asks is there still time? What happens? What are the risks? How does it work? Well, let's talk a little bit about it. It is a tendency worldwide. Okay, we have advanced maternal age issues in many countries. For example, in France, this is information from 2016. 5% of the babies were born from mothers which were older than 40. In this article in the New York Times, they were mentioning that more than 100,000 Americans give birth in their 40s each year. The Guardian in the UK also talks about the issue of getting pregnant over 40, explaining that it is not always a question of choice, but some as a consequence of what happens in their lives. And in fact, it is actually what we're seeing nowadays. These two graphics are very interesting because on the left hand, I don't know if you're able to see it because they become quite small, but these are French data, and you can see that on the left graphic, the yellow bars, the small yellow bars, correspond to the total number of women aged 40 in their 40s in the French populations. We can see, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but here in the beginning of the 80s, that number started to increase. On the blue line, we have births from the number of births from women after the age of 40. And it's very interesting to see that nowadays we are almost at the same level as we were in the 60s, which is somehow surprising. But the explanation is actually on the graphic on the right side, because here you can see that while in the 60s, people, 76% of the women who were delivering after the age of 40 were having their third or even more babies, while nowadays most of them are having their first or their second child. So we've moved from a society where motherhood after the age of 40 was a consequence of having a large number of children, to a model where people are having their first kids after the age of 40. This is obviously a question that's related with the way that we see society, that we face our life. For example, this study that was published in Human Reproduction, this is one of the most important scientific publications in the world. In Human Reproduction, they made a study. They published this study, these investigators, and it was very interesting to find out that in countries such as, for example, Portugal, where I come from, women are considered too old to have babies after the age of 38, 39, while in some other countries, like for instance the UK, France, the Nordic countries, they only think that women are too old to have babies at the age of 45. So it's also a very cultural thing, because in some countries it is considered normal to have a baby later in life, while in other countries, such as Portugal, Ireland, and Eastern European countries, it is considered, for example, in Italy, it's 37. Okay, it's even worse. So if you're 37 and you live in Italy, society considers that it is too late for you to have a child. We all know that's not the case nowadays. And actually, one of the reasons why this happens is because it is very directly connected with the level of education for every woman. And you see that in every country in this list, in every European country, you see that the more educated a woman is, the more likely she is to have a baby in later in life. Because here we see the mean age at first childbirth, and we see that it increases with the level of education in every country. There's absolutely no exception. And another interesting data is this one, which is somehow counterintuitive, because you see that women are having, the more they work, so countries where women are more employed and are more at work and less at home, and they have higher levels of fertility. So this is more of an explanation how this situation is economically driven. So nowadays, in the past, women were probably staying at home so they could have kids. Now women are going to work so they can afford to have kids, which is probably a very sad consequence of our Western world societies and the way we're living nowadays. You see that the countries where women work the most are actually the ones where fertility rates are higher. Um, in the same study from Human Reproduction, the explanations for this are very clear. Women's increased education is linked to later ages at childbearing, which is attributed to difficulties in balancing student and mother roles, as well as the fact that better educated women are more likely to pursue careers that entail a steeper career ladder and more investment in human capital. Women's labor force participation is linked with postponement largely due to the incompatibility between caring for children and participation in the paid labor force, and also young adults may also delay childbearing until their income increases and they can afford children, but also to avoid the wage penalty of early motherhood, because it is unfortunately nowadays still affect in most countries, that women who are having kids earlier, they don't progress in their careers. Obviously, there are ideational shifts in the norms and values regarding parenthood. People, our societies are moving towards smaller family sizes. People are having multiple partnerships. Women are waiting for Prince Charm, and sometimes he takes longer to arrive. And obviously, unions are not as stable as they were before. We have higher rates of divorce, dissolution, non-marital cohabiting. And so all of these are factors that induce delaying childbirth. We get in our daily activity a lot of patients saying, for example, this morning I was talking to a lady in her 40s who told me that she's now trying to have a baby alone. She's, I believe, 42, if I'm not mistaken, and she was telling me that she had multiple relationships. None of them was serious enough for her to want to have a child with that person, and now she just decided that she couldn't keep waiting, and she would try to have her own baby. Okay, so, and obviously there are other economical constraints like the housing market, the fact that nowadays jobs are not as steady as they were in the past. And so obviously this all contributes to delaying pregnancy. But I mean, still it happens. If you go to social media and if you take a look in magazines, you will find out there are a lot of celebrities announcing pregnancies later in life. I took a little turn. I took a little. I did a little research in Google. I found that Salma Hayek, Uma Thurman, Kim Basinger, Susan Sarandon, Celine Dion, Gina Davis, Brooke Shields, Nicole Kidman, Halle Berry, Meryl Streep, Gwen Stefani. I mean, all of them, Mariah Carey, all of them had kids after the age of 40. I can't quote the sources, and I don't know if these informations are reliable. I think they are because it's in Google. But there are lots and lots of women, and so this also creates in our society and in our patients the notions that obviously if they can be mother, if the Gina Davis can have twins at the age of 49, why can't I do the same? And so obviously what these magazines don't tell us is that most of those cases are certainly egg donation. I don't know any details for anyone, but we are creating the false idea that this is easy. Okay, it's not easy, but at the same time it is possible. Okay, and these women are the living proof that it is possible. Obviously they have been through a lot. A lot of their suffering, of their struggling, of their personal battles is not public, but they achieved success, obviously because all of them, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of resources, and some of those resources are not available to every patient. But start focusing on science. What's the problem associated with age? Well, first of all, we're not a very fertile species. As you can see on this graphic, humans, the peak in human fertility is at the age of 25, and then it starts to drop after the age of 34, and it reaches virtually zero at around 46, which is more or less the age of menopause. At the same time, in this dotted line, you will see that the probability of having a miscarriage also increases with age. And so this is why it is so difficult to have kids after the age of 40, because we are working with this small part, with this small tail of the human fertility curve. And why is that? Well, this is another, in order for us to better understand the problem, there was this study published 4 years ago where they evaluated the genetic content of more than 20,000 embryos. And they saw that the percentage of normal embryos, of chromosomically normal embryos, which we call euploid embryos, is around 60% at the age of 34, and then it starts to decline with age. And you see that at the age of 46, we're already around 10%. And obviously, the probability of retrieving at least one euploid embryo in an IVF cycle also decreases steeply with the age. After the age of 35, the drop is very clear, is very steep, and we can't do anything about it. So this is what nature gives us. And this study is also interesting because it makes the distinction between day 3 and day 5 embryos. And as you can see, there are no differences. Those are the same embryos. What changes is the moment where we take a look at the embryos. Another way to look at the problem is this. On this left-hand graphic, you see that the blue line is the probability of having an aneuploid embryo. Aneuploid means with an abnormal number of chromosomes, and again, it increases after the age of 34. The probability of having a live birth, this in the red line, you will see that it will fall down after the age of 34, and the miscarriage rate also increasing, like in the other graphic. On the right-hand side, this is for you to understand what are we really talking about here when we're talking about genetical problems, aneuploidies, changes in the number of chromosomes. You will see this is the probability of having a trisomy according to maternal age. And you will see that after the age of 35, this probability rises incredibly. It peaks in a very remarkable way. And here you will see 3 balloons. On the left-hand side, you will see a balloon stating 1970. This was the mean. These balloons indicate the mother's age at the birth of their first child according to the year. And so you see that obviously every year the average mother's age at the birth of their first child is increasing. And you will see that in 2014 we were at 30, and we are approaching the dangerous level, well, where the trisomy probability starts to increase very fast. Okay, so this is again what nature gives us. For example, those statistics were concerning all trisomies altogether. If we take trisomy 21 alone, you will see that the risk is 1 in every 1,064 at age 25. So the risk is never 0, but at the age 45, it is 1 in every 19 births. So we have to do something about it. Obviously, we can't make time go back. We can't go back in time, but we can handle this situation in many possible ways, and that's what I'm talking about. It is also important as an educational message to talk about the risks associated with age alone. Okay, there is obviously the genetic risk, which is what we have been discussing, but there are other risks like the obstetric risks: high blood pressure, preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, stillbirth, obviously. And in this next graphic, I don't know if you can see the numbers. There are a lot of complications, potential complications in pregnancy, and their incidence according to age. You will see that obviously there is an increase for every risk with age. There is no single parameter that becomes better with age, but you will also see that the global numbers are low. So obviously, if we can have a good control, a good obstetric follow-up, if a good pregnancy care, and if patients behave well, and a lot of measures are taken, those risks can be somehow controlled. But again, there is no alternative, because we can't go back in time, and the alternative to these risks is not trying for a child. Okay, there was this study published in the British Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology, where they compared the population of older women, age 48 and over, on the right hand of this, on the left hand graphic, the bars on the right side were compared to a population of women on the left side. And so they said that obviously they all presented more risks in their pregnancy, but those risks were essentially associated with multiple pregnancies and the use of assisted conception. Obviously, the use of assisted conception is very directly connected with the use of with the risk of multiple pregnancies, and also because those patients that need to resource to assisted conception to have kids are poor prognosis patients. They have other problems, so they are more likely to have poor obstetric outcomes. So, but again, one of the most important issues here is to avoid a multiple pregnancy, because by avoiding that, we are already excluding some of the most important risks. Okay, so it is important to understand that, yes, risks increase significantly, but we can manage them, and their relative incidence remains relatively low, especially if a good pregnancy follow-up is available. So what we need to do is we need to evaluate every patient individually, since all patients are different. We need to discuss risks with patients. We need patients to have informed decisions. We need to avoid multiple pregnancies because they are very dangerous after the age of 40. And we obviously need to move on only if the procedure is safe for both the future mother and the future baby. In most complicated cases, like patients with viral infections, patients with rare diseases, transplantations, and so on, we need to work together with other specialties medical teams. We have them normally at Ferticentro, for example, we always try to collaborate with them, having them authorizing and agreeing with treatments. We try to collaborate while outlining treatment plans. Maybe some patients need to be prepared and adapted to and adapt their medication to start their cycles. In the case of international patients, it is very important to take care of everything before they travel, and obviously we have to have a close dialogue with local medical teams. But having said all of this, I'm sorry. The fact is, the reason why you're probably still listening to me is that you're over 40 and you do want to get pregnant. And you can't go back in time, like I said multiple times. So we need to start talking. And we need to start talking as soon as possible, because time is running against us. So the first thing that we have to do is do the pregnancy risk assessment. Can we cope with it? Is it possible to have a safe pregnancy? If the answer is yes, we move on. So the next step is to assess the ovarian reserve in order to answer the most critical question. Is it still possible with the patient's own eggs, or should we go for an egg donation instead? Or maybe we can try pre-implantation genetic testing as an intermediate solution, okay? And also we need to evaluate the uterus. Is the uterus okay to receive and implant an embryo and take the pregnancy to term? How is uterine receptivity and integrity? Well, we need to evaluate all of that. When we are evaluating the ovarian reserve, the first parameter is FSH. We need to to take a look into the ovaries. This is just to explain. There is a part of our brain called the pituitary that produces two hormones, FSH and LH. Those hormones will act on the ovary, and they will boost the development of follicles that are already in the ovaries, because every woman is born with more or less 400,000 ovarian follicles. And under the action of FSH, from the moment that the woman has her first menstruation, one of these follicles will grow, and every month an egg will be released in the tube. What FSH does is it stimulates the ovaries to mature those follicles with which all women are already born, and while they are developing, those follicles produce estrogens. The pituitary detects the level of estrogen and it stops producing FSH. So what happens when the ovaries are not working anymore? The pituitary will increase the production of FSH. So this is why older women have higher levels of FSH, because her ovaries are not responding, and then the pituitary tries to compensate it. And so this is also why a high level of FSH is a bad sign. You can see in these statistics on the left-hand side that, for example, the higher the FSH is, and the lower the live birth is, and obviously that is also associated with age. So what we know is that obviously it's still preferable to be younger than to have a good FSH. You can see that, for example, a patient aged 24 with an FSH of, let's say, 10 still has a better pregnancy rate than a patient aged 44 and an FSH level of 3. So FSH is a very important information, is a very important indicator on how the ovaries are working with in hormonal terms, but it's not the only response to the question. On the right-hand side, we see a graphic that shows more or less the same. Again, with normal FSH, pregnancy rates are better for all ages. With elevated or borderline or perimenopausal FSH, pregnancy rates tend to decline for all ages. And once again, it is better to be young than to have a good FSH. The other, and maybe the most important parameter, is the AMH. The AMH is produced by the antral follicles in the ovaries. Those are the follicles that are there in the ovaries waiting for the FSH to recruit them, to include them, to turn them into ovulatory follicles. And so while those antral follicles are there and waiting to be recruited by the FSH, they produce this hormone, which is called AMH. The AMH levels are therefore very closely associated with the number of available follicles with the number of follicles that are available to participate in the ovulation. So the higher the AMH is, the more fertile a woman is. You can see on the right-hand graphic that AMH starts to decline with age, and this parameter is very closely associated with the likelihood of pregnancy. Also, the number of antral follicles that are there in the ovaries producing AMH can be observed in an ultrasound scan. And so normally when we talk about assessing the ovarian reserve, we talk about these three parameters: AMH, AFH, and AFC, antral follicle count. Okay. Usually we tell patients that when the FSH is below 15 and the AMH is above 0.5 nanograms per milliliter, it's very important to look into the units. the prognosis is okay. We're not being very demanding with AMH, okay? Most clinics will tell you AMH above 1 is it's the standard of care. We here maybe I shouldn't have written normal prognosis, but when it's still possible to stimulate, we need to have less than 15 in the FSH and more than 0.5 in the AMH. We obviously have pregnancies and children born from women with AMH lower than 0.5 and for FSH above 15. However, that doesn't happen every day. Those are more rare cases. We can try, but patients need to make informed decisions. Okay. So, one of the possibilities while treating a woman which is age 40 or over is to do what we call the pre-implantation genetic testing. I don't know if you can read it because the graphics, well, at least in my screen, are very small, but you can see that these are data from iGenomics. iGenomics is one of the biggest genetic testing labs in the world, and they have made a study, and you can see on the left-hand on the left-hand graphic that the implantation rates on the gray bars in cases where PGTA, pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidies, was done, you can see that there are no significant differences between age groups. This is below 35, 35 to 39, 39 to 41, 41, 42, and above 42. Okay, so you can see that on the orange bars, these are the statistics for all cases without pre-implantation genetic testing, and we can see that the effect of age is very clear. But with PGTA, we are able to select only viable embryos. Still, we don't get over 60% of pregnancies, but what we see is that as long as we transfer genetically viable embryos, the age effect is very small, okay? Even for women older than 42 or 43, we get almost 60% of pregnancies. And obviously the same happens with delivery rates, and the opposite happens with miscarriage rates on the right-hand side. Okay, so what's the benefit of doing a PGTA? It is all about information. Okay, what I always tell patients is this: PGTA will not pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidies, meaning testing for for chromosomical abnormalities, chromosomical number abnormalities. That will not transform a bad embryo into a good embryo. Okay, the embryo will always be the same, but it will give us information, and that information is very important in a decision-making process, especially while deciding to resource to egg donation or to trying for a treatment with your own eggs. So PGTA is a very important tool. It's something that in an ideal scenario we would always do, because it's very frustrating when we are transferring apparently good-looking embryos and we don't get a pregnancy and we don't know why. Here, if we know that an embryo is viable, obviously it doesn't give us 100% chance. There are still 40 or 30% of cases where we don't get a pregnancy, but in those cases the problem is most likely on the uterine side, and there are a lot of factors associated with uterine factors. There have been a number of webinars on this subject, so I will not talk about it. One of the possibilities associated with PGTA is egg banking. What is this? We can, a lot of patients do that. We can do an ovarian stimulation. We can freeze the eggs. Nowadays, we have over 90% of survival rates for frozen eggs for women of all ages. Obviously, the older the woman is, the less likely are the eggs to survive, but also egg vitrification. this is what we call the egg freezing process, is also a quality test for the egg. So if the egg doesn't survive vitrification, that's most likely because that egg is not viable, okay? And so it's very unlikely that the baby would be born from those eggs. But what we can do sometimes is to do repeated stimulations to accumulate a good number of eggs and then fertilize them all and do the PGTA assessment. By doing this, we can start with a pool of 10 or maybe 15 eggs, or as much eggs as we can. Sometimes we have patients just producing 1 egg or 2 eggs, and so one by one we can accumulate eggs. But again, this will give us number, this will not give us quality, okay? We don't know. A few weeks ago, I had a patient for whom she is 42. We have accumulated, I believe it was 8 eggs. We were very happy because we not only we got 8 eggs, but from those 8 eggs we got in 3 different stimulations. We obtained 6 blastocysts, and then when the PGTA result came over, it was a completely deception because all of those embryos had major abnormalities, major genetic abnormalities. So this patient is going to try with an egg donation treatment. Again, this is about having information. However, if this patient hasn't, if it wasn't the PGTA, this patient would have transferred maybe in 6 different embryo transfers. She would have 6 negative results. She would be obviously very disappointed. We would be probably also testing her endometrium, looking for thrombophilia, immunitary factors, and so on. And the answer was, in fact, very clear. The embryos were not genetically viable. So by doing this, that patient, unfortunately, she hadn't a single embryo to transfer. However, it was very clear for her that after doing 3 ovarian stimulations with high dosages, after being able to get 6 nice-looking blastocysts, still it was impossible for her to get a viable embryo. And so she moved on with egg donation. We're planning the treatment in these upcoming days, but she's in peace with that decision because she knows that she did everything that she possibly could. She tried as much as she could with her own eggs, and it was just nature who didn't give her the possibility. Obviously, we also have a lot of positive stories where we can get, I mean, there was a lady last year, age 46, where we get, after also 3 stimulations, one of the embryos was viable and we transferred and she's pregnant. And so everything went well. So we have all sorts of examples. But still, the importance here is that people are making informed decisions. And obviously, sometimes if FSH is higher than 15, if AMH is lower than 0.5 or 0.3, it's always respectable, the decision of going directly to egg donation. However, for some patients, they need to be in peace with that decision. And PGTA is about this, is about information, is not about changing the content of the embryos, because the embryos would still be the same. It is about giving you the information that you need to go through with your treatment or not. So it's very important that people make informed decisions. So we get to egg donation. Egg donation is what we call the last resource. Obviously, no one starts this process saying, I want to become a mother with somebody else's eggs. It's never a first option. However, it is very often, the most reliable one. And why is that? Well, the answer is very simple because it works. These are data from the CDC, the national authority in the United States, and we can see that for all age groups, the odds of having a pregnancy with donor eggs, it's the blue line over here, are more or less the same. They don't change with age. It's always between 60 and 70%. And at the same time, on the green line, you can see that the chances of having a pregnancy using patient's own eggs are never as high as with donor eggs, and they drop very steeply, as we have seen in the first slides. They drop very steeply after the age of 35. So egg donation works. It's a non-invasive approach. It's also a very good solution for many patients, and besides, it's also the only solution for most patients. The alternative to egg donation is not doing treatment. Okay, it's not sometimes a decision between trying with your own eggs or resourcing to egg donation. No, it's about trying with egg donation or not trying at all. So obviously, when we use egg donation, we think it should be done with non-anonymous donors because every child has the right to know their origins. There was a webinar that I made a few weeks ago on this topic. I will not repeat it, but we need to find a donor that matches the recipient, the egg recipient. The process has to be transparent. The child at the age of 18 should have the right of access to the donor's ID. The number of donations per donor should be limited. The process, the compensation paid to the donor should be transparent. That should be controlled by the society, and obviously the local authorities. And especially the whole process has to be very well counseled. Okay, so we don't want donors who don't want to be found being found because someone, two of their cousins, gave their DNA to a DNA bank in the United States, and and they accidentally found out that they are relatives, and so they end up finding their egg or sperm donor. And so we don't want a donor who donated under anonymity being found by accident and having his life completely upside down because of that. We want people donating and being in peace with the process. Obviously, egg donation should be affordable, should be accessible, without waiting lists, and this is how it is done in Portugal. As I said before, nowadays there's no such thing as an anonymous donor. There are studies on that with current DNA bases. It is very easy to find the identity of supposedly anonymous egg donors. All human rights courts and authorities are issuing recommendations towards non-anonymous egg donation. So we very strongly defend the cause of non-anonymous egg donation, and it's also the best way to achieve a pregnancy when it is impossible using your own eggs. And often and sadly, this is very much the case after the age of 40, but at the same time, it is a very good opportunity to have a safe pregnancy, to have the same risks, because the risks of a pregnancy after the age of 40 are the risks associated with the age of the egg, not the age of the egg recipient, the most important risks, obviously. And so egg donation is a very good prognosis, non-invasive and cost-effective solution. So I'm very happy to provide you more information on this. You can call us, you can write us. I'm very happy to assist you. Thank you for listening. I'm also available to respond to all questions you might have.
All All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Vladimiro, for that very interesting presentation. Lots of details as always. So this is always good for to hear what you have prepared indeed. So thanks for that. And yes, there are like plenty of questions for you
Okay.
already. So well, let's
Okay.
get to them,
Let's go
right?
for it. Okay.
All right, let's have a look at the very first question here. I have a question which I have had two IVF sections and they have all failed. And I have two embryos frozen and I'm thinking of going for the third try. I'm 37 and wanted to find out what are some of the factors that makes an IVF fail. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I don't know. I would probably. Um, I'm assuming that this patient has tried IVF twice, so I would say that we would certainly test the embryo. Even embryos that are already frozen, they can be tested genetically, and so we can take that uncertainty factor out of the equation. So if the embryos are genetically viable, we would focus our investigations in the endometrium. And if the endometrium is okay, and there is a lot to look for in the endometrium, there are immunitary factors, there are endometrial receptivity factors, and also there are other more rare causes like thrombophilia, um, like general immunitary disorders. So there is a lot, and obviously there are gynecological issues like problems in implantation, fibroids, problems with the uterus, and so on. So, but first of all, I would start by testing the embryos to know whether the embryos are viable or not. If the embryos are viable, I would then focus on the endometrium. If the embryos are not viable, we would need to see if there is any room for optimization in the ovarian stimulation, and if so, we obviously would need to try again. There is no alternative.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much for the very
Mm.
first question and, of course, for your answer to that. And now we have a next question, which is like in four parts. Okay, so let me just start with the first one. I am 47, did 3 IVF with own eggs with the Crete fertility. All three didn't even implant. They did the hysteroscopy to check the uterus. It was perfectly fine. Then I went to Spain and did an egg donation IVF, which was implanted but miscarriage after 7 weeks. I wanted to have a child in my life. What else I need to check? What else I need before I am going to do another IVF? Additional information: my habit sperm is okay. My eggs are not good quality. I don't have much time to try several times as I am reaching 48. Please help me, guide me to go straight away to a
Okay.
successful IVF.
Can we go back to the first
Yes, of
part of the
course.
question? Okay.
There
So,
it is.
um, okay. In principle, so having 3 IVF attempts with own eggs, but I mean, I don't know if they did pre-implantation genetic testing, so we don't know whether the embryos are viable or not. But I'm assuming that if these treatments were done at maybe 45 or so, it's most likely, the problem was most likely a genetic issue of the embryo. Then this Vidaya Rubini, she did a treatment in Spain with egg donation, and she miscarried at 7 weeks. Well, that can happen. Again, we don't know the quality of the embryo. I would say miscarriages happen. Normally, we'd say that there is an indication to search for miscarriage causes when we have at least 3 miscarriages. I wouldn't say that this is an indication to start doing some tests, but in this particular case, I would, well, first of all, the obvious solution is to do another egg donation treatment. And then I would start with the endometrial receptivity evaluation. It's a very important factor. It impacts a lot of patients. That's also the most likely issue to be found. if everything is okay, if we have good quality embryos and if we have receptive endometrium, I would try again without any further tests. If it doesn't work, because we usually get several embryos from an egg donation treatment, we would probably look further, and maybe we could look for immunitary factors like natural killer cells, KIR antigenes, HLA-C antigenes as well. So there are a lot of things that we can investigate. I would go one step at a time. I don't believe in looking for everything at the same time. But again, I would say that if in a new egg donation treatment we get good quality embryos and we get a receptive endometrium, I would try again directly. And I think the prognosis would be very good. Obviously, assuming that everything is fine with hysteroscopy, like it's said above.
All right, excellent. Again, thank you so much for your question, of course, as well as your assistance with this. Okay, and let me just have a look. There is another question, of course, ready. Is it true that IVF with less medication, lighter stimulation, mild IVF produce less but better quality eggs, and this is more relevant for women over 40, or does this have no difference?
I will give you the most honest answer I can. I actually don't know because a few years ago, we all believed in this. There was a lot of people doing mild IVF, including ourselves. There are several mild IVF protocols with, like it says, with less medication, lighter stimulation. Very often we just had one egg or two eggs, and in principle, those would be better quality embryos. However, recent studies, especially published in the last 2 years, have shown that there is actually no limit, no direct, no upper limit in the number of eggs regarding their quality. There have been studies showing that even cases where we get 30 eggs or 40 eggs, the likelihood of having an abnormal, a genetically abnormal embryo doesn't increase with the number of eggs. So in principle, with nowadays the tendency to answer this question is no. But again, 2 or 3 years ago, the answer would probably be different, or maybe 5 years ago. So there is also an interpatient variability. For some patients, this could be true. From others, this couldn't. Nowadays, I believe that no one is, this technique of mild IVF in older patients is not a first choice. I would say that we would only do that if doing IVF with high dosages and a lot of embryos and eggs doesn't work. Maybe then we could try this approach. But in principle, we would not do this as a first-line approach.
All right, excellent. Again, thank you so much for yet another question, and of course your explanation to this indeed as well. And just let me have a look. Yeah, okay, sorry. So let's have a look at the next question. So I have been diagnosed with natural killer cells after 2 failed attempts, IVF and ICSI. Do you believe in natural killer cells? Do you treat them? I am considering egg donation and are 45.
Well, I believe in natural killer cells. I mean, they are not. I understand the question because this is not something that all clinics follow. Okay, a lot of patients. We only start looking for these more, let's say, unusual or less frequent factors when we don't have an explanation for previous failures. And so when we find out that there is an increased level of natural killer cells and all associated all changes, we should treat them. We have protocols that are specific for patients with high natural killer cells. And if you've been diagnosed with that, we would definitely treat you accordingly. Okay, so we believe in their effect. We don't. How, let me tell you this. We don't search for problems with natural killer cells as a first line approach while dealing with a failure. Okay, there are other factors that we think that are more likely to be the explanation for an IVF failure. However, if we find out that there is something wrong with the natural killer cells, we would treat them with specific protocols.
Fantastic. Once
And
again.
yes,
Mhm.
sorry, the last part, egg donation is certainly a good solution, and with a preventive protocol for the natural killer issue, prognosis would certainly be good.
Mm, okay, thank you so much. This is, of course, a follow up. So, would NK cells prevent egg donation?
Yes, yes, they would have exactly the same effect. Well, not exactly because there are other immunitary issues, but yes, they could prevent egg donation to work. This is why we have to, as I said before, we have to take care of that issue. We have to treat, to give the proper medication to avoid that from happening.
All right, understood, of course. Thank you so much once more. Okay, let's have a look at the next question, which is, of course, ready. If I do egg donation, I'm 44. What are my chances of having a baby? I had a successful pregnancy 5 years ago.
Um, well, I would say, Adriana, that your chances are more or less the same as every other woman doing egg donation. I mean, you have a good prognosis factor, which is the fact that you've already had a baby and a successful pregnancy. So you've proved that your womb can take a pregnancy to term. Okay, assuming that everything is normal, I would say that the chances would be the same as we have seen in the slides, 60 to 70%. So I would say that chances are very good.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that again, of course. Okay, next question. Thank you for a very balanced and informative presentation. At 42, my AMH is 2.24, which I know is good for quantity, but does it have any impact on egg quality as well?
Yes, I would say that, well, if we're talking about 2.24 nanograms per milliliter, it would be a wonderful value, okay? Obviously, we cannot talk about quality without checking, okay? But I would say that Claire is certainly a good prognosis patient because a good AMH is also associated with better quality eggs. So, and obviously, the more eggs we get, the more likely we are to find a suitable and a viable egg. So, I would say that I would definitely recommend PGTA in Claire's case, but I would say that it does have an impact on egg quality as well.
All right, excellent. Again, thank you so much for
Okay.
explaining. Next question. Okay, next one, of course, again, ready. Is it possible to stimulate a woman in her 50s, period stopped last year with an AMH of 0, having gone through 8 out of 11 cycles with her own eggs? If not, what about with a nuclear and spindle transfer?
Well, unfortunately, I would say that with current technologies, it is not possible. With an AMH of 0, being in their 50s, well, first of all, in Portugal, it wouldn't be legal. But from a strictly scientific point of view, it would. It, well, in medicine, we don't like to use the word impossible, okay? But chances would be extremely low. I cannot say 0 because, I mean, nature gives us a lot of surprises. 2 years ago, we had a patient getting pregnant spontaneously at the age of 51. So that can happen. Uh, but I wouldn't say, I would say that chances are almost 0, if not 0. nuclear and spindle transfer. Um, at, we don't believe in the results. Let's not put it this way. Nowadays, there is a lot of discussion going on this subject. There are studies, and in fact, there are very reliable studies that have been done where we are doing cytoplasm transfer, which means that we take the cytoplasm of an egg from an egg donor, and we put it into the egg and leaving the nucleus of a patient. And we know that by doing that, we would have the nucleus of the patient who is getting pregnant, which has all of her DNA and most important characteristics, and that will work with the mitochondria from the egg donor. The mitochondria is sort of a central of energy for the cell, and that will give the cell enough energy, the egg enough energy to develop and maybe correct eventual potential genetic problems. However, that has only been properly tested in younger women. In older women, where there are abnormalities already in the nucleus, it's yet to be proven whether there's any room for correction of potential genetic errors. Personally, I find it very unlikely. Okay, but I think science will progress. There have been studies that where a part of the ovarian function has been recovered even in menopausal women, and so maybe within years from now this will become possible. Nowadays, I would say it is not possible. I wouldn't believe in it. But science is evolving, and so maybe in a couple of years it becomes possible. But nowadays, I personally don't believe in it.
All right. Again, thank you so much for providing a thorough explanation on this, of course, as well. Next question, right here. I have just turned 43, so no, I don't have much time on my hands, just about to start first cycle. How many cycles can one do back to back? What is advisable?
Well, there is. Well, I'm assuming that Rebecca wants to try with her own eggs. We I would not recommend to do more than 3 ovarian stimulations. I would say that first of all, we would need to assess her AMH, especially the AMH, obviously the AFC, the antral follicle count, and also the FSH, which is the other hormone that's associated with how the ovary works in hormonal terms. But so I would we would check that out, and if it's still possible, we would do her an ovarian stimulation. I would say our goal is always to try to have 10x, because we know that by starting with 10x, I mean, we have all seen the percentages. If we're talking about 10%, we will theoretically have at least one viable embryo. Okay, so we would start with 10x and try to have as many embryos as possible, and we would do PGTA and see if any of them is genetically viable. Obviously, we can bank eggs, we can do an ovarian stimulation, get, let's say, 4 or 5 eggs, do a second ovarian stimulation, accumulate 5 or 6 more, and do it for the third time, and then fertilize all the fresh and the previously frozen eggs. We It's about statistics. Okay, so I think more than 3 ovarian stimulations, up to 3 ovarian stimulations, there is no doubt that they are safe, they don't pose any risk to your health, and so we can have a try and check for their genetic content. Above that, I mean, all studies indicate that it is safe. There is no upper limit. There is no study saying that let's say on the 10th ovarian stimulation, your risk of cancer increases. There is no such information, but there's certainly a threshold above which we should not continue to do ovarian stimulations. Normally at our clinic, we say that 3 ovarian stimulation, it's a wise decision, okay? It's within what's acceptable. After that, if we don't get good quality embryos or eggs, it's better to think about egg donation. But again, every case is a case. Some cases we try more than that. Some others we try less than that when we move on with egg donation. So it's also a personal decision from the patient's side.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. And actually, there is a short follow-up. Does that mean 3 IVF cycles?
Yes, not 3 IVF cycles, 3 ovarian stimulations with egg pickup cycles. Okay, so because obviously we can do 3 IVF cycles, but in my opinion, it's better to accumulate eggs and then do 1 IVF cycle after 3 ovarian stimulation, 3 egg pickups, and then 1 IVF procedure and 1 PGTA procedure. It would be less expensive and more informative, but the result at the end of the day would be the same as with 3 IVF cycles.
All right, excellent. Thanks again for the
Mhm.
clarification. Okay. All right. Next one. It's not really like a question. However, I would like you to see it and perhaps comment on that. Okay. Perhaps you have something that you could add. So I think it's about the PGTA. Okay. So I think you're not giving the full picture, but only showing one side of the PGTA story. You should also talk about the fact that the testing is faulty only takes from the one area, that there are embryos that come back as bad embryos that actually go on to have healthy babies. Not to mention the fact that there is a huge conflict of interest in the clinic gets if the clinic gets a large amount of money if they refer a patient for testing. And there's a follow-up. Okay, so I will clarify on the conflict of interest. The clinic also gets a payment when the patient does the PGT testing, even if the clinic is not doing the testing and only referring the patient. They do know nothing and they get money for this. So obviously it is in a clinic's financial interest to have patients do the testing since they got money for doing it. So anything you
Well,
can comment?
okay, so let's start from the beginning. Maybe this was the first part. So
Yes.
the first question that this person mentions is that is related to mosaicism. Obviously, when we're doing PGTA, we cannot genetically analyze all cells in an embryo. We have embryos with more than 100 cells at the blastocyst stage, and we take like 5 or 4 or 6 cells from the embryo, and our decisions in our classification of that embryo is based on what we found. We have criteria for mosaicism levels that are acceptable and for mosaicism levels that are not acceptable. Okay, so it is theoretically not in, there are studies where embryos and there is also a possibility that some of these mosaic embryos have different cell lines, and those bad cell lines, those good cell lines, I mean a good and a bad cell line, the good takes over the embryo, the development of the embryo, and so the part of the embryo that carries the abnormality doesn't develop, and the rest of the embryo develops. There have been case reports about this, and we can obviously test for that. However, nowadays we work with labs that use that are very careful in assessing mosaicism in the embryos. Obviously, if mosaicism is never zero, and theoretically speaking, that can happen to all embryos. Okay, so but again, we need to have a criteria, and the number or the percentage of embryos that actually that are classified as abnormal embryos that end up giving a viable child is very low. But again, obviously that can happen. it's controlled in the sense that we are genetic labs worldwide are lowering and lowering their cutoff levels for mosaicism, and the process is getting better by the day. Nowadays, for example, at our clinic, we're only working with next generation sequencing, which is a technique whose accuracy is very good, is at 98%. Obviously, it's not 100%. And the other way around can also happen. We can classify an embryo as viable, and theoretically speaking, it could have another line of cells that are genetically abnormal that can take over the embryo and originate a baby with a genetic abnormality. I've never seen that in my professional life, but it is a theoretical risk. So, yes, there are mosaic embryos, and no, I don't believe that they are a reason to stop doing PGTA, because by doing PGTA, we have a better. It is what I said in the beginning. It's not about changing the embryo. It's about getting information on the embryo. Okay. Obviously, if we have an embryo which is a carrier for a genetic abnormality, we have first of all to see what type of abnormality are we talking about, because there are different types of abnormalities with different impacts and different chances of originating a normal child. So it is a complex question. It is not, I'm not a geneticist, but we have people who specialize in that. But we can obviously, that's something that we always have to explain patients. There is the risk of mosaicism. The other part, regarding the conflict of interest, that clinics get a large amount of money. Well, I cannot talk by other people. At Ferticentro, we do the test ourselves. So we only charge, so this is not the case of doing nothing, because we do the treatment. And we only charge the patient. I can tell you, testing an embryo costs 360 euros. So it's not, well, I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's nothing compared to the total. It's less than 10% of the cost of an IVF cycle. So this remark doesn't make any sense. I don't know, maybe this person is talking about some other thing. The clinics that I know worldwide, I don't think that this is happening. Obviously, I don't know everything that happens everywhere, but as I said, we're talking about 360 euros. That's how much patients pay for testing an embryo.
All right, excellent. I mean, thank you so much for explaining how it works, of course. And actually, there is like a follow up. Okay, so I guess the patient was talking about some other clinics, so that's the thing. Just will show you in such case, the follow up. So thank you for that answer. In Canada, the clinic refers the patient, and the clinic gets around $2,000, and the testing center gets 2,000, 3,000. Yeah, so.
Well, I guess I have to move to Canada. Well, this is a joke. Well,
Of
I
course.
don't know nothing about this. In Europe,
Of
at least,
course.
it is not like this. It's not like this in Portugal. It's not like this in Spain, I'm sure. I believe it's not like this in the UK and Poland. I honestly, I don't think in Europe you will find this scenario anywhere.
Okay. Thank you so much for the clarification. Yeah, because of course, it definitely this what you have just presented, definitely this is doesn't sound, well, nobody would like that for sure.
Of
So
course, of course.
thank you so much for that, for sharing also. Yes, and
Yeah.
of course for your assistance with this. Okay, and let's have a look at the next. The next question is also right here. So, what would be the cost for an egg donation cycle at your clinic, and is there a certain number of blastocysts guaranteed?
this is actually an interesting question because a classical egg donation cycle at our clinic with a 2 blastocysts guarantee is 6,440 euros. That includes everything. We also have programs with 5 blastocysts guaranteed that costs 10,800 euros, if I'm not mistaken. What's the difference? Well, the difference in the lab, we always do the same. Okay, so we stimulate an egg donor, we take all of our eggs, we fertilize the eggs, and we try to get as many eggs, as many embryos as possible. Obviously, if we have a compromise of obtaining 2 blastocysts with the patient, this means that if we only get one, the patient gets a second egg donor free of charge. Okay, if we have a compromise of having 5 blastocysts and we only have 1 or 0 or whatever, the patient gets as many egg donors as necessary to achieve the agreed number of blastocysts. So this is we're talking about financial guarantees, because from the clinical and the lab point of view, what happens is always the same. We try to do our best. We try to have as many viable embryos as possible. We don't know how many we're going to get. These modalities are more about, obviously, it is cheaper to have a 5 blastocyst guarantee than to try twice. Okay, so this is more about, but essentially we work with these 2 modalities. Obviously, you can hire 2 blastocysts guarantee and end up, for example, today we had a lady who went for a 2 blastocysts guarantee, and she ended up with 11 blastocysts. So that happens. Okay, it's a question of luck, obviously. But we always try to get as many as we can. This is about finances, okay? Because in the lab we don't make any distinction between donors and cases. We always try to get as many embryos as possible.
All right, excellent. Again, thank you so much for your question and, of course, a thorough explanation to this, as always. Okay, next question is right here. Does IVF stimulation increase the chances of having abnormal eggs compared to an egg produced in a natural cycle?
Again, a very interesting question. I don't know if anyone can really answer this question. In theory, yes, but again, there's no alternative, because it will depend. So, starting to organize the answer. If a woman has a low ovarian reserve, if her hormonal levels are lower, the quantity of hormones that are stimulating the ovaries during the development of that egg would be variable, and so maybe in a natural cycle the egg will not be normal. By doing an artificial cycle, we can assure that the quantity of hormones is appropriated for a normal development of the egg. Okay, so in this particular example, an artificial cycle would be better than a natural cycle. However, if we're talking about the 25-year-old woman with normal hormone levels and we are giving her a stimulation, obviously, since we're going to get so many eggs, it's probably that some of them are not are abnormal. They could have some abnormality. But so the right answer to this question is it will depend on the age of the woman. It will depend on the hormonal levels of every woman. Okay, in principle, if we have a low ovarian reserve, I mean, if we have a very high FSH, that will mean that in principle a natural cycle egg will not be viable.
And once again, thank you so much for
Okay.
this. Okay, there are like few questions left, like 5 of them. So of course we will be
Okay.
slowly finishing. But of course, if you have any questions left, this will be like a final call for those questions. And the question that we have here is: I have one blocked tube and the other cut off due to ectopic pregnancy in 2007 8. After that surgery I had a couple of pregnancies but aborted them due to that my other tube also got blocked. After 7-8 years I had 2 IVFs and none of them even implanted. What could be causing this? I want to have another one because I have own eggs frozen. I'm 37.
Okay, so with her tubes not working, with Rubaba's tubes not working, there's actually no way to get pregnant naturally. So IVF is the only solution. Um, we again, I don't know the circumstances of the treatment. I would certainly prefer to test the embryos once again to see if they are viable or not. If they're not viable, I would focus on the endometrium and to see if there is any gynecological, first of all, any gynecological factor, then endometrial receptivity. We always go like this. First line, we take a look at the uterine cavity to see if we have perfect uterine conditions for implantation. On the second level, we look into endometrial receptivity, things like the ERA test or the ERA map and so on. We test for endometrial receptivity, and we also test for problems in the endometrium immunitary environment, like natural killer cells, KIR genes, KIR antigens, and so on. So, but again, as I said before, we don't test everything at the same time. We start with the most likely causes, and then we go for the less likely ones. We also screen for thrombophilia from other immunitary factors, and so we would see if we find anything. We probably know how to deal with it and how to maximize the odds. It's a good thing that Rubaba Sumaila has her own eggs frozen, because that will allow their clinic, her clinic to work with eggs collected at a younger age. However, if she's still 37, I would probably try to use to do another ovarian stimulation and leave those eggs as a last resource, because at the age of 37 a lot of women are producing normal eggs, and so those eggs could be kept there for maybe a second child or so. Obviously, there is money involved. We have to think of the economic factor, but I would recommend to save those eggs for later and to try to do another ovarian stimulation while the ovaries are still working.
All right, another great answer. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
And the question that we have is right here. Thank you for a very informative presentation. What is the success rate and live birth rates for fresh versus frozen embryo implantation? What is the scenario for assisting international EU patients? Who would you recommend contacting to discuss all aspects of this within your clinic in Portugal? Thanks
Okay.
again.
Well, hi Sharon. Thanks for your very nice words. So, starting with the first question, the success rates for fresh versus frozen embryo implantation. I would say there is no difference. Nowadays, with the current vitrification methods, the odds of an embryo surviving the process of freezing and warming are more or less 98%. So with modern vitrification techniques, it's almost the same. We're freezing embryos from a day to the other. That example that I just gave of the other lady that has 11 blastocysts, we're freezing all of them because she's now going to start her treatment, because we prefer to wait for the egg pickup of the egg donor. We fertilize her eggs, we develop the embryos, and then once we had confirmation that the embryos were available and had good quality, she will start. So we're doing this in an elective way. Also, we prefer to use frozen embryos because that leaves us room to optimize the endometrium and also to organize the treatment, not only, especially for international patients, even more especially nowadays that with this whole COVID-19 situation, we have travel planification is sometimes not very easy. And so for all of those reasons, but even before COVID, we were always recommending to use frozen embryos because that will allow us to optimize the uterine conditions of implantations. The scenario for assisting international European Union patients, 80% of our activity is with international European Union patients because we're one of the few countries where we have non-anonymous donations and we do have donors. Countries such as the UK, they have non-anonymous donations, but they lack donations and treatments are very expensive. Countries such as Spain, Greece, Czech Republic, they have eggs, but they are anonymous donors. So this is, we are very used to do this. This is what we do on a daily basis. We work in 6 different languages. And so we're very happy to receive you. If you want, you can talk to me myself. I don't know if I can put my email here.
Yes, of course, go ahead and type it in. No worries.
I'm trying, but I can't.
Can you?
Here it is. Okay,
Okay,
sorry.
good. No
It was
problem.
here. I will put my email here. Okay. So you can
Excellent.
write me directly. I will also put my mobile number here. Okay. And so you can also text or call me. There is no problem. This is my mobile number. Just use it. Okay, it's right. So I'm very happy to assist you.
Thank you so much for this as well. And actually, if we are talking about laws regarding egg donation in Portugal, there are like 2 very similar questions. So let me just go through them right away, okay? So you can have a look.
Mhm.
So first is, what would we get to know about the donor, hair color, eye color, height, age, anything else, and what age would the child be able to get the information on the biological mother? And the next one I will also show you, as it is again similar. Could you briefly mention the laws regarding donation, refer best source of information for this? Is there a maximum number of times an individual can donate in Portugal? Egg donation is non-anonymous, of course. So let me go to the very first previous
Okay,
question. Yeah,
I'll try to be quick. So what would,
no problem.
okay, informations on the donor. Physical characteristics, so all of that, hair color, eye color, height, age, level of studies. We are now, specifically in our clinic, some of our donors have extended profiles. We're not allowed to disclose identifiable informations, but we are working in providing other informations about the donors, things like what kind of music do they listen to, what kind of studies have they done, do they like riding a bicycle, their favorite color. I mean, because it is important for us that patients feel connected to the donor, and so this is just to build a relationship, to build trust in the process with the patients. So some of the donors are already have already an extended profile, some others still don't. That's something we are developing, and obviously we're getting more and more information, more and more donors with this extended information level. But obviously, physical characteristics, 100% of the cases, level of studies, 100% of the cases, age of the donor, 100% of the cases. And what age would the child be able to get the information? At the age of 18. That's what in the law. It is a guarantee from the Portuguese state. So even if a clinic closes, it's the National IVF Authority that will give the information on the ID of the donor to the child born. And that information is kept for 75 years. So regarding the legislation in Portugal, well, there is another webinar where I've talked a little more about this, but very briefly, we have non-anonymous donation where children can access the ID of their donors at the age of 18, and every donor, egg donor, can donate 4 times in her lifetime, separated by 3 months. It is controlled by the national IVF authorities. Before we can accept a donor, we have to register her in the national online, in the national databases. We are audited and inspected several times for this process. Donors get a payment of 878 euros. That amount is fixed by law. We cannot pay in cash. It has to be paid by bank transfer. It is a very transparent process. Donors sign a receipt, and we have to have that proof of payment. It's the same value for every public and private clinic, and again, that value is fixed by law. And so, and all donors have agreed to be non-anonymous. So they have signed the document where they acknowledge the fact that at the age of 18, once the child gets the age of 18, their identity can be disclosed to the children. So donors are prepared for this. They will not be surprised. That's one of the advantages of the Portuguese law. Like I said in my other webinar, the problem nowadays is that people who have donated anonymously in countries such as Portugal a few years ago, or Spain, or whatever, they think they are anonymous. But however, nowadays with those those DNA banks that are popping all over the world, it's very easy to find a donor, and the donor himself doesn't even need to send his DNA to those banks. If just by coincidence one or two of his cousins decide to put their DNA in one of these banks, children born from his donation can find his donor or her donor. So nowadays there is no such thing as an anonymous donor, and so we have to do this in a controlled way. We don't want your child to knock on the door of someone who doesn't want to be found, who doesn't expect to be found, whose family would be probably very impacted by that information. And so everything has to be done in a transparent, well-counseled, balanced way, instead of the way it nowadays works with anonymous donation, where things are completely out of control.
All right. Again, thank you so much for this. And just to let you know, of course, I have just sent you a link to the previous webinar on non-anonymous donation in Portugal, so you can have a look if you haven't seen it already. I'm sure you will find it very, very interesting and useful as well. All right. Thank you so much. And now let's have a look. There is another question, of course. So let me just show you. So we are reaching menopause. Do we need to take hormone treatment before we go to the treatment?
Yes, I mean, all treatments need hormones. Okay, without hormones, we don't have pregnancies. If women are reaching menopause, we have to do what we call hormonal replacement cycles, where we give the hormones that are required to hold the pregnancy and to take a pregnancy to term. And so that's always required. Obviously, we tailor every protocol according to each patient's needs, but that's always required.
All right. Excellent. Again, thank you so much for that. And there are like two questions left. And one is actually in regards to egg donors. Okay. So as far as egg donation is concerned, there are a waiting list for a Black woman. I'm 42 and 8 months.
No, there is no waiting lists. There are no waiting lists for Black women. We have lots of Black donors, so there's no problem.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for the clarification. And next question is right here as well. Is a day 3 embryo transfer more beneficial for older women?
Well, it's another very interesting question because nowadays there is a tendency worldwide to do transfers on day 5. 90% of our transfers, maybe more, are done on day 5 or sometimes even day 6. However, what changes is the amount of information that we have on this particular embryo. Okay, so we have patients, and I have a few cases of those patients that have never had a pregnancy with day 5, but only with day 3 embryos. Okay, so there is this dialogue between the embryo and the endometrium that there are some theories saying that if the embryo gets earlier to the womb is the best possible incubator, is the ideal incubator, and so the sooner we put the embryo at the womb, the better. And so the embryo starts its dialogue with the endometrium, and it has maybe more chances of being implanted. There are studies also stating that extended culture could be associated with some problems like epigenetic abnormalities and so on. So I would say that yes, day 3 in principle should be more physiological. However, nowadays day 5 is also fine, and it allows us for a better selection of embryos, and so pregnancy rates are higher at day 5 because obviously we the group of embryos that is available on day 5 is larger than the group of embryos which is available on day 3. So on the opposite, only the best embryos reach day 5. So we have a selection of embryos on day 5. So, but again, some studies have been published that show that day 3 could be more physiological, and so if we want to optimize chances, probably day 3 would be better. But again, day 5 gives us more information, and it's perfectly safe. We worldwide, I mean, there's a tendency towards day 5, and I don't think that's going to change.
All right, excellent. Thank you again. And actually, there is another question from Rebecca, so let me have a look at here. So, would you recommend two embryos being transferred at once, especially for older women?
No, I actually
Okay.
recommend one embryo at a time because of the risks associated with multiple pregnancy. Also, there have been recent reports on immunitary factors that, in some cases, especially when women have, these are related with natural killer cells and the KIR antigens. Well, in some cases where women are KIR AA, two embryos can actually be less likely to implant than a single embryo because of the immunitary effect. Also, the risk of multiple pregnancy is higher, and it could lead to complications. So I would recommend just one embryo, especially for older women.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the clarification once more. And now it looks like this will be our last question for today. So
Okay.
let me go straight to that. It's two parts, okay? Two parts of it. So if one has day 6 embryo, can one take the progesterone for 6 days as well? Or is it okay to still continue to take progesterone for 5 days?
A very interesting question. I actually have the same doubt. Well, I will explain. Normally, uh, we're talking about the window of implantation. So we would need to know exactly what in a physiological cycle it should be the same because the window of implantation can be sort of open for up to 4 days. Okay. However, what we have seen in recent years, especially with the investigations of groups like iGenomics and the ERA test, we have seen that in fact the window of implantation, especially in older women, is a lot narrower than we initially thought. And so nowadays we are programming transfers with for 120 hours plus or minus 3 hours. So we're being very precise while programming embryo transfers. So I would say that it is more important to be sure that the endometrium is ready. And what counts is the number of hours of exposure to progesterone. So we need to know, for example, if the endometrium is receptive after being exposed to 120 hours of progesterone, that's when the embryo should be transferred, regardless of whether it is a day 6 or a day 5 embryo. However, we do need to understand what are we talking about when we say day 6 embryo or day 5 embryo. Because nowadays we are in the era of time-lapse technology, and we know that obviously some embryos on day 6 are already hatching, and so they are in a very developed stage of their development. They are very advanced, and some others look like day 5 blastocysts, okay, and they could still be viable. So it will depend. I would focus more on the receptivity of the endometrium than in the degree of development of the embryo, because normally, obviously it will depend on the clinic, on the conditions of treatment, but usually we only take the embryos until day 6 or even day 7, when at day 5 they are not developed enough. Okay, they are going a little slower than usual, and so we expect a few hours more. Nowadays, we're not even thinking in terms of days, because what you mean by day 6, it could be 144 hours, because that's 6 times 24, but 144 hours, it's already a very advanced embryo, okay? Some people say that day 6 starts at 121 hours, because it's the first hour after day 5. So it's preferable to think in terms of hours of embryo development and also hours of exposure to progesterone. And we need to make sure that the embryo starts blastulation before 123 hours, or ideally at around 96, 100 hours. Those are the most important parameters, but obviously they could change from clinic to clinic. But again, I would prefer to focus on endometrial receptivity rather than in the degree of expansion of a blastocyst.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much again for a very interesting question, as you've mentioned, but also for your explanation in details. And well, in the meantime, we did receive one question, so I guess we can still answer it, right, Vladimiro?
Yes, of course,
Okay,
of course. Let's go.
excellent. Thank you
Let's
so
go.
much.
It's Angela again, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. Let's have a look at the question. So, what is
Okay.
your view on epigenetics from the surrogate on the donor egg? On a donor egg embryo, do you have a view on doing a genetic carrier disease test on the surrogate, even if she is only carrying the baby? My husband and the donor do not have any shared carrier disease, but I don't want the epigenetic to turn on anything in the baby if the surrogate has either the egg donors or my husband's carrier conditions.
Well, we're actually talking about two different things here. So first of all, my view on the epigenetics from the surrogate on donor egg embryo. Well, first of all, I don't like the word surrogate, because a surrogate mother is someone who doesn't want to keep the baby, while a woman who gets pregnant with egg donation is someone who wants a baby and can't have a baby with her own eggs, and so this is why she's using another person's eggs. So I wouldn't call her surrogate. I would call just the mother. Okay. Also, when we transfer an embryo into the womb, there is a dialogue that will start between the genes of the embryo and the genes of the mother, which are activated and inactivated accordingly. So it's the mother's genes who tell the embryo when it should develop, the pace of its development, the rhythm. So I mean, if obviously this is impossible, but if we were to transfer the same embryo to the womb of two different persons, the baby that would be born from these two theoretical pregnancies wouldn't be the same, because it every woman's genes and uterine environment, and obviously they are feeding the embryo through the placenta as well. And if they are diabetic, if they have hypertension, if I mean even the music that they listen to, it all can affect the embryo. But on an epigenetic level, so it's the mother's genes that will trigger genes in the embryo on the embryo development. That has been proven, that genetic dialogue between the mother and the baby. So there is definitely an effect on how the embryo's genetic develops, and that effect is controlled by the mother. Okay. So another completely different thing are the genetic carrier tests that we can do on the baby, the genetic carrier test that we can do between the male partner and the egg donor, or maybe the female partner. Nowadays, we have commercially available lots of packages. There are packages of 300 diseases. There are packages even above 1,600 diseases. Well, because we're all, as humans, we're all carriers for 5 or 6 genetic diseases. Okay, I've never done one of those tests, so I don't know, but I'm certainly a carrier for a lot of those diseases. And so, when we do those tests, we try to make sure that the egg donor is not the carrier for the same genetic recessive diseases as the male partner. So, because if they were both carriers for the same recessive disease, the child will have a 25% chance of having one of those diseases. Okay, so again, this example is 301 genes. Okay, so we know that there is, if the donor and the male partner are not carriers for any of these diseases at the same time, there is no way that the child will have any of these diseases. Okay, that is completely guaranteed. So you can be completely reassured. Don't worry about this, because your baby will not have any of these diseases. Okay, that's guaranteed. Obviously, there are hundreds of thousands of genetic diseases. We cannot test for everything. Even though I think in the future we will end up testing for everything, but nowadays we can't. But 300 diseases is already a very complete study. Okay, so I would say don't think about it. I think 300 diseases is already a very good genetic matching, and there is no epigenetic influence that can trigger one of these genes to have to turn the disease, because it is required a gene from the male partner and the egg donor, so the child can have the disease. And by doing these tests, if they are obviously well done, there is no way your child will have any of these diseases.
All right, excellent. Again, thank you so much for a thorough explanation. And actually, well, this was our last question. So thank you so much, Vladimiro, for all of your thorough answers, of course. And well, there are some comments right here I would like you to see. Wow, such a
Well,
comprehensive answer. Thank you very, very much.
well,
This is the
thank
first
you.
one. Just the first one.
Okay, okay.
Are you ready for
Thank
more?
you. Please.
Okay, excellent. So next one is Dr. Vladimiro, as always, excellent webinars. It is a pleasure to watch
Oh,
webinars run by such a friendly, communicative person. Hope to see you here soon again.
well, well,
I
thank you
couldn't
so
agree
much.
more. Thank you so much for that, because this is actually what I would love to say. Exactly.
Okay,
And
thank
one
you.
more. Thank you so much for all the valuable information and well, very detailed, insightful, holistic presentation. Excellent presentation. One of the best. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, it was really nice for me to be here. I hope I was able to help you, and please feel free to ask or call, to ask anything or call or WhatsApp me wherever. I'll be very happy to help you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. As you can see, there are more of
Thank
those, of
you.
course. And
Well,
to all of you, I would like to thank as well for all of the questions. And I'm very happy to hear that you are satisfied and this was very useful, of course, for you. And yes, I'm sure we will have some more events coming up soon. So, Vladimiro, it's always a pleasure to have you here. So, thank you so much.
likewise,
And
Caroline.
exactly, right. So I'm sure we will be back. And just let me know. Let me just remind everyone that we will. This has been recorded, so of course you will have a chance to watch this on myivfenses.com, and of course it will be uploaded tomorrow on our YouTube channel, so you can check this out. And as you know, we will be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. UK time. So again, I hope you will be able to join us. Of course, there are more topics and more questions I'm sure you have, so just go ahead and register. And once more, thank you so much. Have a lovely and relaxing evening, everyone. And Vladimiro, well, the same for you.
You
And
too,
till the
Caroline.
next time, right?
Yes, obviously, obviously. I'm
Excellent.
very happy to participate in these events, and congratulations for this wonderful initiative. And
Thank you so
so
much.
take
We
care.
wouldn't be
Bye.
able to do it without you, because all the webinars, previous ones, and this one has been really, really great. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Again, thank you and
Thank you.
bye.
Bye bye. Cheers. Bye bye.